Hello and welcome to Real Estate Live UK. We are entering now our fourth week of free online events focused on regeneration economic development across the UK. In fact, over 10,000 people have attended Real Estate Live events so far, so you're in good company. Welcome, and I hope you're going to enjoy this. This session is a new addition for this week, our lunchtime conversations, where we sit and watch a couple of people having a chat. It's proved popular. Plenty of you booked in for this one, so settle in and enjoy as Mitchell Labiak from Property Week talks to Mark Robinson of the High Street Taskforce. Mitchell, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ross. Yes. So I'm joined by Mark Robinson from the High Street Taskforce. Today we're going to be talking about the High Street, which is a topic which I'm sure Mark has an awful lot to say about, considering his title. Mark, why don't you just give yourselves a little bit of an introduction and sort of tell the panel, or rather tell our audience watching at home who you are, just for those who don't know already.
Okie doke. Well, I think it's important to say that I actually have a day job. The High Street Taskforce is a bit of an all-encompassing side hustle, but my day job, I'm co-founder of a business called Ellandi, and Ellandi are one of the UK's leading investment and development businesses, specialising in town centre and shopping centre assets. So, that's in itself quite a job at the moment. So the task force is a privilege, but it's also an awful lot of extra work layered on top of that. But it's all very much aligned to what I do during the day job as well. To give you some background to the task force, so the task force was born out of a report done by Sir John Timpson in 2018. So I think it is worth bearing in mind that the troubles of the High Street were well identified long before COVID. COVID has clearly made everything worse. It's become an accelerant. It's made 10 years of change happen in 10 months. So what did Sir John say needed to be done back in 2018 before anybody had even heard of Wuhan or facts? What he said, there was three strands. There was a quite tactical strand of things that he thought people could do in place to make places better. He then suggested that there was a future high street fund, and he then suggested that rather than government getting luminaries from the retail industry to do reports every 5 or 6 years, quarters being 2011, for example, that there should be a task force, dedicated task force set up to build various bits of to deliver on certain things in local placemaking. And the four things that the task force are charged with building are the following. One is building capacity in local government. Secondly is building skills and expertise. Thirdly, it's promoting collaboration on both a local and a national basis. On a local basis, that's what we can do with some of our toolkits and our skill sets and our interventions. On a national basis, that's what I lead with the board. And then the fourth stream is information. It's sharing best practice. It's putting in place toolkits that people who care and are passionate about their place can pick up on to really deliver a transformation for their town centre, as well as, and very much looking forward to this element of it, celebrating successes, doing case studies of what's working well. It has been dreadful. In certain ways, I think it's going to get a little bit worse on the High Street, and some of the government support is removed. But I can't be failed to be sort of impressed and excited by the general groundswell of love and support and excitement about making change happen in our places. Because if we don't care, and if we don't really pick up the cudgels of this challenge, things are going to get a lot worse. But that's not a future I envisage because of the enthusiasm for making change happen that I see across the UK from the public and private sector.
So I want to follow up on one of the things you were talking about there, because you said that indeed, this panel has been around long before COVID, or is in the works long before COVID, because of course the High Street has faced problems long before COVID. But I wanted to start with a question which is kind of quite pertinent to right now, which is obviously the government is considering, we don't know at this point, but it's been widely reported that the government's going to extend those lockdown restrictions today. So just wondering kind of how you feel about that news and what support the High Street does need if restrictions are extended.
That's a really good and difficult question. As befitting an investigative reporter, when I did this, I hadn't realised that was your beat at Property Week. COVID was sideswiped us all. So we have a program of interventions across 70 local authorities in the UK, which we've only just started because we spent 12 months advising government and advising local places on COVID response. Partly on allocating some of the recovery fund money and what have you. So it's set us all back, and we're not where we want to be in terms of staging our interventions. It is kind of a bit of the perfect storm for the high street. In that, yes, there's been this decline in demand for retail, pure retail on ground floors or in our towns. And one of the things that shopping centre owners, private owners and local authorities have been doing is backfilling it with F&B. It's the right thing to do. We need more restaurants. We need this cafe culture. And in a way, that's kind of uniquely, resident and unrestricted F&B is the last thing that's going to be opening up. So it is a challenge. And without getting our pubs, restaurants, nightclubs, cinemas, all working at their full capacity, having invested so much time and effort in developing that capacity in town centres and on high streets, is going to hold us back. It's a further challenge, but let's be frank, I don't think any of us want to go back into the period of any sort of more formal lockdown. That would be a disaster. So I think, it's not for me to comment on the epidemiology around all this, but I think if this means that when we open for good, then that has to be a good thing, because that's what people want. People want certainty. F&B, you've got you've got to get the staff in place. You've got to get the food in place. You've got to get your beer taps cleared out. It's none of these things happen overnight. So it's the certainty that I think we need to try and bring.
There's a couple of follow-up questions I wanted to ask there. I also wanted to mention, probably should have mentioned this at the top, that if anyone watching at home or in your office or wherever you're watching this on the move wants to ask a question, please do so using our Q&A function rather than the chat function. If you just pop a question in there, I'll try and get round to it. It was an interesting point about that you made there about F&B. The ultimate question is, what sort of percentage of F&B and sort of leisure, and what percentage of retail should we be looking for in the high street? Is there a magic source there? Absolutely not.
So with all due respect, that really it's definitely the wrong question. One thing I'm passionate about is individual places getting their individual purpose back. The problem we have in high streets is because retail was the most valuable use going, so it crowded out all those other great uses that used to make our places special. And as a result, we ended up with these clone towns that everybody fell out of love with. So suggesting to any one town, the magic formula is X plus Y equals Z, that if you have a mixture of 55% open A1 and 33% F&B, it just won't work. Places have got to be very, very particular and proud about their own vision for their place. And they've got to base that vision upon what is real and needed and sustainable by their community. Whilst we're here to celebrate success and celebrate case studies, just because a food market works spectacularly well in Altrincham, and bless them, doesn't mean that a food market is going to work everywhere. And that's one of the things that does worry me about some of the placemaking interventions I'm seeing, is everybody's assuming, all Victorian building, stick some bearded hipsters in there, town saved. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I do feel solidarity with the bearded hipsters, but I take your point. I was just wondering about in terms of other sort of use changes, because we talked, or use mixes. The government obviously recently extended its permitted development rights. Do you think this is the solution that the high street needs at the minute? Because some people are uneasy about allowing, the government allowing developers to convert shops into homes. So I was just wondering what your feeling was about this.
One of the reasons I was delighted to be doing this role is I do think that the government is making the most concerted efforts to make a change within high streets of a generation. So, we discussed the Future High Street Fund. That's £1 billion. That's being topped up to the Towns Fund, 3.6 billion. The total amount of money is looking like about £8 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not enough. And we can talk about public-private partnerships in a little while, no doubt. So they're serious about making change happen. And that's also backed up with the planning policy as well. So the planning white paper is pretty radically pro-change, because without some dramatic change within our towns and our high streets, things ain't going to get better, and they're probably going to get worse. So I can't knock I won't knock, and I'm not here to criticise government. If I disagree with government, I tell them privately as opposed to in front of 70 odd friends on a webinar. So I think the intent of the policy is strong, but I think it is also fair to say, and I'm not speaking out of turn here, pretty much every single organisation that represents anybody in placemaking or the built environment feels that unrestricted PDR from retail to resi is a bad thing. Yeah, I think it does worry an awful lot of people that, people talk about the gap tooth smile. Once you lose one or two shops to flats, they never come back. And once you've got that gap tooth smile of missing retail frontages, dead frontages as we used to call them, that further undermines vitality. So I think there are definite concerns about that. But have we got 30% too many shops? Yes. Do we, as a result of that, have to get rid of an awful lot of shops? Absolutely. But it's doing it and doing it quickly is really, really important as well. But we need to do it in a way which we don't create problems for the future.
We've got a question here from the audience, and they are coming in relatively thick and fast now. So thank you for those, and please do bring them in if you want some more. Someone asking about sort of, I suppose, following on from the bearded hipsters point, which was about there are many entrepreneurs that are already involved in reusing vacant shops and department stores, for example, in central London. They're asking, is the High Street Taskforce selective approach too little, too late? And how are you going to tie in with those efforts and booster them?
It's an interesting one, because I'm not sure what this selective approach is. Certainly we are anything but selective. I mean, it's in terms of, we're pro-change, and whatever that looks like, and we'll give people the backing and the toolkit and the language to create change to happen. So as far as being too little and too late, as I said, it was put in place before 2018, before COVID. People were still buying Debenhams on 25-year leases, thinking it was a good credit risk 2 or 3 years ago. So I don't think to be fair, it was put in place in anticipation of some of these problems. So the fact that we exist means that better things will happen than would have happened otherwise.
But on the, on the point of sort of the High Street Taskforce and what it is doing, there are some who have, levied criticisms out there. I know Roger Wade, I think in Property Week actually might well have described it as a band-aid. The high streets are in these dire straits, and the government's response is to put together an organisation, even a well-meaning organisation. So I was wondering what you make of those sorts of financial criticisms and what sort of financial backing you have to make these ideas.
I love Roger deeply, and he knows, he's a very, very talented entrepreneur. As I said, if you look at the context of interventions that are now available that weren't available 2 years ago, so you've got £8 billion. You've got a task force which is spreading skills and capacity and best practice. And you've got a planning white paper, which is going to allow these, if you want to change a department store, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier now to change that department store into whatever you like, because you've got PDR and you've got Class E. So I think we are in a significantly better place to promote change. And it's being backed up with the task force promoting best practice, and also with the government putting money there. The Towns Fund monies, the Future High Street Fund money is coming on tap this year. And it's just a coincidence that it's the year we're coming out of COVID, but my goodness, that money's never been more needed. And just as well. So we will start seeing this dramatic change happening now. And even with this pro-change agenda, making stuff happen in the built environment still takes too long. So some of this change will only start coming through in the next 2 or 3 years.
I suppose on the change taking too long, I don't know how the planners in the audience feel about that point, or whether they agree that change takes too long. But I did want to, because I know you said you want to talk about sort of examples of what's happening up and down the country. I don't know if it's specifically a high street task force example, but there was a New York Times article last week. So even the international press are jumping on British high streets, in which you were quoted, and they were talking about pool, where essentially landlords have had to sort of stomach more favourable lease terms for tenants. Do you think that's where this revival, if there is going to be one, is headed? Will landlords simply have to accept, less rent essentially from their tenants if they want to encourage people to back into these spaces?
Yes. It is that simple. Well, it's not that simple. It's far from simple. But that's a really interesting example you've cited there. So that's Kingsland, which is a sort of a secondary street off the shopping centre in Poole, which is owned by Legal & General. Now, many people on this call will know that the blue ribbon of leasing, or our entire leasing infrastructure, was based around this conceit of the institutional lease. And the institutional lease was a 25-year lease from an institution to a great retailer, a great occupier who'd stay in there for 25 years. That's all gone. But unfortunately, all of the gubbins surrounding it, all the legislature, all the law, all the case law, all the practice is still tied up in this post-war way of doing things. And so I actually think it's quite inspiring and really quite interesting that it's one of the country's biggest institutions that's saying, hold on, this isn't fit for purpose. We're going to do something different. And that's, interesting enough, being led by a young guy called Denz Ibrahim, who's not actually a property bloke. So it's taken somebody from outside the industry to come in and be appointed head of retail property at Ellandi to shake things up and come up with some dramatic solutions, which may or may not work, but we'll all watch it closely and look to follow it. But to support sort of initiatives like that, there does need to be far wider structural change, which has to be driven by government because they've got to change the law.
I found your answer particularly interesting because I imagine you speak with landlords quite a lot in your job, and you, I suppose, in Ellandi, you spend a lot of time talking with landlords. So, how do landlords feel about this when you sort of say to them, look, you guys just might have to stomach less rent or more favourable lease terms?
Well, the market is forcing change on people. And I think if we accept this change and we accept that whatever you felt your retail property is worth a lot less now. So what's more important to your retail place or your retail property? And it's easier if you're in a shopping centre or a parade of shops because you can be a bit more creative and you can think a bit more long term and think about what fundamentally creates more value, and that's vitality. And so how do you make a place more vital over the longer term? And to do that, you drop your rents to an appropriate level. You offer flexible leases. You don't ask for a personal guarantee. You don't ask for a 12 months rental deposit. This is the market forcing better practice on the retail property industry, which was far too resistant to change for far too long.
I wanted to follow that up with a question then from Ajit, who asks, I think is quite an interesting question. They say, what is the task force position on the evolution of local communities and how the high street is representative of these social cultural differences? So you talked about that sort of, having that excitement on the high street. Is there scope for a community business to compete with the big brands for prime physical space, and how?
100%. There is no bigger advocate for community involvement, community use than the High Street Taskforce and me personally. So, for example, one of the people, so the board was appointed before I was appointed, which is a bit odd, but, we're dealing with that. And, one of the first appointments I made to the board was Vidya Alexan from Power to Change, which is probably the leading community business incubator body in the UK. So, and we're actually under the sponsorship of High Street Taskforce, we're setting up a separate working group called Platform to promote more community use and better practice and make it easier for people to understand what value community uses add to the high street. So it's absolutely in the middle of the fairway of the agenda.
I want to follow up. It's not so much a question, but it was obviously someone who sort of, because you talked a little bit about what the High Street Taskforce is doing. So I just wanted to put this to you from an anonymous attendee, and I'm sure you'll have a response to it. But their argument is that the High Street Taskforce does not offer answers, but is only identifying problems. We need proactive action, not just people meeting to identify problems. So I was wondering how you feel about that. I mean, what are you doing from a proactive point of view in response?
Did I misspeak in my preamble? I'll claim to know the answer to anything. I think we can suggest what the answers are. We can't make, places have got to decide for themselves what the answers are. What we can do is make some suggestions. We can celebrate best practice, and we can offer frameworks. But it is anti great placemaking for a national body to tell places what they must do. What it's all about is building the capacity in those places, in those communities, like the other question asked, so they can reach the conclusions themselves. But that doesn't mean we say we don't have the answers. We can say, well, this has worked here, this has worked here. Apply a process and get to your own conclusions, because the answer is that every place works out its own true purpose, and then absolutely with passion and vigor goes after that and proves to all of their stakeholders, their shoppers, their employees, their employers, why that place is special and why people should be there. That's what it's all about.
I got another question from Annie, which I thought was quite interesting, because we were talking a minute about sort of what landlords might have to stomach in terms of rent leases of the future. And Annie says that regeneration of the high streets rely not only with the occupiers and landlords, but consumers. Do you think that the retailers and business owners are paying fair in not reflecting reductions in rents in their product pricing, e.g. a cup of coffee? And then they say, at the moment, I see efforts from landlords and property owners, but no change in expectations of pricing from the businesses. I don't know what you made of that.
Crikey. This is an interesting, you must have an interesting audience, because these are really quite left field questions.
I'd say an engaged audience.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Look, crikey, I say this as a large owner of real estate. I don't think anybody's begrudging occupiers having to do whatever occupiers have to do to stay in business at the moment. I think they are facing extraordinary pressures, and I think there's going to be some clearly, rents are falling, absolutely, but at the same time, people are struggling to find staff. And then once the government support, things such as business rates and VAT, once that support's removed, it's going to become harder and harder. So I don't, I feel the pain as a fellow coffee drinker, but I don't think there's an awful lot of price gouging by occupiers going on at the moment. That's a personal view.
No. I mean, do you think though? I mean, I suppose what this person was asking, I don't want to put words in Annie's mouth, is whether. I mean, because we talked about how landlords might have to stomach higher rents, but whether customers like me and you might have to stomach paying more for a cup of coffee, as the to help the high street recover. I don't know whether that was a point you've ever heard anyone make before.
Well, let's think of it another way. We're repeatedly being told that consumers are becoming more environmentally and socially conscious. And should a reasonable consumer be expected to pay a little bit more for a ethically sourced fair trade coffee over something that isn't? Well, quite possibly. And we're repeatedly told that consumers will make that decision because everybody cares about the environment. If I'm honest, and again, amongst sort of 59 friends, I sometimes worry that the consumer isn't the person we think they are. If it still very often comes down to cost and convenience. If it wasn't, then Amazon wouldn't be doing so well. We all have a choice not to one-click buy this stuff, to get off our backsides and go down to the local hardware store. But most people click. People talk about millennial consumers. My daughter is still buying far too much plastic tat on Boohoo. As I've yet to see the ethical consumers as quite the force that outside of quite nice middle class panels that I sort of sit on all the time. And I'd love to see more of it. I'm not seeing.
I mean, do you not think? I mean, even because it's a valid point, isn't it? It's all well and good saying that there are these, as you say, very middle class neighbourhoods where people are willing to go back to their local high street and pay more for their local coffee to support their local coffee shop. But I mean, do you not think COVID-19 has changed the way a lot of people view their high streets, and even in sort of more I don't know, working class neighbourhoods and in sort of regional towns and cities?
Yeah, very much so. And I really, really hope so. There does seem to be, the big debate, the unknowable question is just how working from home is going to affect these things. If you're not getting however many people traipsing into the centre of London each day, what happens to that spending pattern? Are people, I live in Balham, so it's about 25, 30 minutes into the office. But I've spent more at my local Boots, sandwich shop, hairdresser. All of my convenience spend would have been within 100 yards of a tube station near work for probably the last 30 years of my career. I'm spending an awful lot more in Balham because I'll nip out on a Friday lunchtime if I'm working from home. So spending patterns are changing. That doesn't mean that we have to beggar our city centres to make our local high streets and local towns better. But there is probably a bit of overdue equalisation going on a little bit.
I want to ask a potentially a final question. It depends how long you take to answer it. But what is the single most important thing that the High Street Taskforce should deliver? I hope you have a good answer to this one.
Right. What I would like is for the result of the work of the task force for placemaking as a skill to be recognised, and for local and national government to see the results of the work we've done with £2 million a year and invest far more heavily in the process of making places better. Unfortunately, and this is not a criticism of any government of any flavour. All governments love shiny new, love building stuff. There's nothing a politician loves more than putting a hard hat and a high-vis jacket on. And as we ramp up to 2024, you're going to see more and more of it. But actually, what makes a change is the people, it's the place leadership, it's the vision that those people have. And that's what I very much hope the task force is going to do. It's going to deliver this recognition that you don't build your way out of troubles. We're going to place manage our way out of the troubles we have through inspirational place leadership built upon the strong foundations of those 4 pillars that I talked about, which the task force is going to deliver in 150 places across the UK.
Well, look, I think that might just bring us to time. Thank you so much to thank you, first of all, Mark, for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much to the audience for sending in your questions. I know a lot of you sent in a lot of questions, but unfortunately we didn't get to all of them. But thank you so much for submitting your questions nonetheless. Some drilling has just started next door to me, so it's a very good time for me to wrap up this panel, and I'm going to hand back over to Ross. Thank you very much, Ross.
Thanks, Mitchell. Thanks very much. And no drilling here yet, but you never know. I had a fire engine the other day. Anyway, thanks very much, Mitchell. Thanks very much, Mark. Really interesting. The only problem with that was it was only half an hour, and I kind of wanted that to go on for a bit. So that's a shame, but never mind. We can all watch it on demand afterwards and perhaps enjoy it over again. Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks very much, Mitchell. That's the end of this particular Real Estate Live UK event. We are just about to share that there is one further event this afternoon that you can attend, a virtual tour of Purley with Develop Croydon. That's where I have my eyes tested, so I should know what they're looking at. Then tomorrow, if people are wanting to join us tomorrow morning, we have the London keynote to kick us off. And a great session about healthy places. So building, designing and managing healthier places. And I think we can probably relate that back to the high streets. So anyway, thanks very much, everybody. I'm only left to say goodbye.